This is World to Win, bringing you the latest news and analysis from a socialist perspective.
Welcome back, everyone, to World to Win. We took last week off, but we're here again with an exciting episode, and we have 4 speakers here today, all from different parts of the world, so it's very, very exciting episode to come back to. Yara, I haven't seen you in so long. How have you been?
I know, it's been crazy, hasn't it? I think it's been really crazy in both our respective locations, so I'm looking forward to talk about this in a bit. But I mean, today we're actually talking about one of the most important subjects, I think. We're obviously approaching the 25th of November, which is the day for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And it's actually been declared relatively recently in 1999 by the UN. But before then, there's actually been kind of mentioning of it and kind of marking of it in Latin America, because the day is actually marking a date in 1961 where 3 sisters and activists were murdered after orders from the Dominican dictator at the time. And I think even though it's been so long since the 60s, today's women's lives and freedom to control their own bodies and the violence against us as well continues to be endangered by both reactionary regimes, but also regimes that pretend to be progressive all around the world. And, you know, I think in Myanmar it was very clear that where gender-based violence was used to oppress the movement against the military coup, where young women and also women workers played such a frontline role. And then obviously, I think, Toya, you can talk about the US, because there's been so much that's been happening in the US to do with violence against women, and then we also have Afghanistan, where just pulled out, and then the lie of defending the rights of LGBTQ plus people and of women just clearly, very quickly became clear that it's a lie. And so many women and so many workers and people generally are stuck there as well.
But Yara, even just like not talking about what's happening all over the world, I'm really excited today to get into this idea of gender-based violence and where it comes from and like what this term actually means. You know, we talk a lot on our show about the actual atrocities that are happening, but really getting into why it's happening. I hope some of our speakers can touch on that today.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, not just because we need to be educated on it and it's because it's interesting to know where it's coming from, but also, like, at the end of the day, our point is to eliminate it. And as much as the UN likes to call this the day for the elimination of violence against women, we know, and I think we're definitely going to talk about how and why the UN can't eliminate it, and why we are the only people that can eliminate it. So I'm really excited to introduce our guests. We do have guests from all over the world. So I want to say hi to Adil. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
And we also have Tiffany here.
Hi, guys.
And we also have Laura, who is a veteran on our show.
I am not. Hi, comrades. Good to see you.
And we have one more speaker who wasn't able to make it, but we are going to watch a clip of what she has to say. So while I have everyone here, Yara, the reason that I haven't seen you in so long is because of COP26. We were talking about it. This was the big convention that happened in Scotland where all of the, CEOs of the oil companies got together to talk about how they're going to save the planet. And I know you were there and a couple other people there. So I want to hear all about it. Before we get into today's episode, what was your favorite part about COP26 besides your photo on the front of that paper? Or whatever it was.
Yeah, we were on every single paper and every single news outlet. It was incredible. And you know what? Being there, it wasn't hard to tell why. We had the most amazing, energetic, vibrant blocks I've seen in a very long time, definitely, on the protest. And I'm saying that we still need to realize that it's like 100,000 people strong protest, right? It's not like we were just there on our own. And it was amazing to see so many members of our organization from all around the world. 300 members were there, and we had a block that was much larger than that because of also how energetic our block was, but also the messages that we were putting forward, not shying away from talking about the fact that the people in the COP, the people who, the world leaders that are in the COP, are not there to actually do anything or change anything. You know that the biggest delegation to COP this year was representatives of the fossil fuel industry, for example, which obviously is ridiculous. And this protest was amazing, and I think our bloc was really clear, saying that what we need is not just vague system change. What we need is socialist change. We need to fight against the capitalist system. But I know that both Adil and Tiffany were there as well, and I don't know if you agree with me, if you had the same kind of like transformative and like exciting and inspiring experience there as well.
Yes, it was. It was a very good experience for all of us. But for my branch, we were more than the half of my branch is new members since less than a year, and some of them less than a month. So it was our very first big experience, and the very first big experience for many comrades to see the power of organized people. I think that what was attractive in our bloc is that we were all one message, one program, and one set of ideas and claims, and it was amazing, and I'm lost for words. Yes, I'm very excited to continue to work with our international since this journey.
Wow, it's so amazing. I can't, like, I'm looking back at my first protest and imagining that protest being your first one. Like, it's 100, like, if you weren't there, it's 100,000 people. It was incredible in its, like, size, but also the messages and how radical people were. And you know, what you're saying about it being international and how important it is as our bloc, I think is by far what made us shine so much. And I think all of us, both individually but also in our respective countries, have learned so much from this experience, and everyone's brought something to the table. It was just amazing. And you know, my mom actually messaged me after that and was asking me, so are you going to, before that, and she was like, so are you going to march with the friends from Israel Palestine, or are you going to march with the friends from England? I was like, no, that's not how it works. We're all marching together. We are an international organization, and this problem is international, so we're fighting together. But I'm also interested to hear what Tiffany had to say about COP.
Well, we were three comrades from Poland, and it was a bit like what Odile described. The two other comrades they joined during the pandemic, so it was their first occasion to meet comrades from the internationally and the biggest demos they had attended. And they came back very enthusiastic with everything they have learned, including the methods we have, how we organize the blog to make it attractive. And but to me, one thing that was amazing was how people were attracted in our blogs with the message of socialism, and people were really looking for what this system change can be. And it was quite, they were quite eager to hear, okay, how do we want to implement the change and start discussions about nationalizations and green jobs and so on. So not only our blog was amazing in terms of attractivity, energy, and so on, but also in terms of the political program that we could bring into the demo.
Laura, I'm over here having FOMO. I know you weren't there either, so exciting to hear from the three of you what you did. But Laura, what were you doing during COP? Because I know you weren't there, and neither was I.
No, but I was marching in solidarity in Dublin. But yeah, no, the socialist bloc was so important, wasn't it? And what's come out of COP26 is just this, whole establishment had a lot resting on trying to look like they're taking climate change seriously, because the movement has put a lot of pressure on them. But I don't think they're even being able to spin it as a success, because it's just such a joke. So the power in the movement, the 100,000, needs to be replicated in every country in the world, building a movement of Indigenous people, of young people and of workers to challenge really the root of the problem, the profiteering of the big business and industry that, you know, are burning the planet.
100%. I think it was also so inspiring from, you know, Glasgow to see how literally every big city around the world was having protests at the same time, and also on the Friday with the strike for future movement as well. Really brilliant. And I don't want to spoil anything, but if you are curious to know what we looked like and what Block was like, because obviously we're all talking about it so, you know, enthusiastically, just wait till the end of this episode, but don't tell anyone I told you. But now let's go back to why we're here. So before we start asking all the questions, and obviously we have a really brilliant kind of diversity of locations of people that are here with us, but we also have a pre-recorded video from one of our members in Brazil, because as we said before, this day actually started and is marked in Latin America, and the continent continuously, and especially in the last few years, has had massive movements against gender-based violence, for abortion rights, against femicide. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to hear what Kaya has to say from Brazil. So let's watch this video now.
Yara, primeiramente, satisfação de estar aqui compartilhando com vocês um pouquinho da nossa realidade na América Latina. É um pouquinho porque a gente precisaria de muito mais, né? Compartilhar, fazer trocas muito mais amplas, mas acho que é possível a gente dar conta das perguntas direcionadas a nós, né? Então, sim, as mulheres latinas não ficaram de fora das grandes mobilizações massivas promovidas por mulheres nas últimas décadas, e essas mobilizações elas têm garantido algumas conquistas bastante pontuais, e aí vale destacar que são pontuais justamente porque não há qualquer garantia para a classe trabalhadora, para as mulheres trabalhadoras, para o movimento negro, que essas conquistas elas serão permanentes dentro do sistema capitalista. Então a gente precisa sempre estar em estado de alerta, né? As mobilizações dos últimos anos na Argentina, para além de denunciar, né, o aumento da violência contra as mulheres através do Ni Una Menos, elas também vêm se articulando há anos pela garantia dos direitos sexuais e reprodutivos, tiveram êxito finalmente com a legalização do aborto pelo Sistema Público de Saúde argentino. As mulheres no México também avançaram nesse sentido. No Chile, nós tivemos aí exemplos massivos, né, onda de mulheres, juventude, classe trabalhadora, denunciando, né, os desmandos do governo em relação à questão da pandemia da Covid-19, essa horda de mulheres na rua. Foi possível fazer com que o governo se comprometesse com a construção de uma constituinte após anos de ditadura, uma constituinte que ainda era da época da ditadura de Pinochet. Nessa nova conformação da constituinte, as mulheres são maioria e a primeira líder indicada foi uma mulher Mapuche, que acho que demonstra aí a força, né, dos movimentos sociais, do movimento Mapuche também, na tentativa de construir aí uma nova versão, né, do seu estatuto nacional, que garanta aí os direitos dos povos originários da Colômbia também. A gente tem visto, no Chile no caso, a gente tem visto, né, na Colômbia, as mulheres denunciando também em atos de rua massivos a opressão do braço armado do Estado, cujas forças policiais têm violentado sexualmente as ativistas que compõem aí, né, grandes movimentos de rua denunciando o governo. Então é importante que essa denúncia ela ganhe uma repercussão nacional. Foram mais de 113 casos de estupros registrados durante as manifestações por essas forças de segurança, e o movimento abraçou e vem denunciando isso também e pedindo o fim dessas violências entre as suas pautas de reivindicações. No Brasil, o mapa da violência, que é um indicador interno que nós temos, né, ele tem demonstrado um aumento de 22% nos casos de feminicídio entre as brasileiras. Há alguns estados do país, como o Acre, que é composto 70% da sua população por mulheres, por pessoas negras, então mulheres negras e indígenas formam esse contingente populacional do Acre, cujo aumento do feminicídio foi na casa dos 300%. Então a gente precisa de fato denunciar, porque na pandemia essas situações de violência política, violência de gênero têm se demonstrado de forma muito mais agressiva contra as mulheres. Segundo dados da ONU, você tem cerca de 118 milhões de mulheres latinas abaixo da linha da pobreza. Significa também dizer com esse dado, né, que a pandemia escancarou as desigualdades sociais existentes aí entre as mulheres e que torna cada vez mais difícil para essas mulheres abaixo da linha da pobreza romper com diversos ciclos múltiplos de violência, sobretudo aí para as mulheres negras e para as mulheres indígenas. No Brasil, não bastasse, né, já essa questão da pandemia, nós estamos vivendo sobre um governo que é o governo Bolsonaro, de extrema direita, né, e que tem prejudicado muito a nossa condição de vida enquanto mulheres, enquanto negros, enquanto população indígena. É um governo que tem, através de suas falas e ações, estimulado que seus seguidores pratiquem diversas formas de violência contra esses setores que já são há mais de anos, né, perseguidos e excluídos dentro do Estado. Então as mulheres, a população negra que sofrem essas constantes violências tem tentado forjar formas de resistir, né, a esse atentado contra suas próprias vidas, contra suas próprias existências, que estão para além das questões colocadas aí pelas desigualdades econômicas, né, que nós vivemos. Então agora no 20 de novembro os movimentos organizados estão chamando, né, um grande ato nacional pelo Fora Bolsonaro e para denunciar o racismo estrutural que submete a populações, a população negra sobretudo as mulheres, a situações de desigualdades extremas. Então 20 de novembro para nós é a data de morte de Zumbi dos Palmares e é a data que representa a consciência negra, né? Para além do fora Bolsonaro, do fora bolsonarismo, a gente precisa denunciar o racismo como parte estrutural desse sistema capitalista, que, portanto, o próprio sistema ele precisa ser superado para que as mulheres e homens negros e indígenas, de fato, possam ser livres. E aí é uma tarefa nossa dos movimentos de esquerda, das mulheres, das lutadoras e lutadores socialistas, encamparem e disputarem o feminismo na perspectiva antirracista, na perspectiva socialista e apresentar de fato um programa que garanta para nós promoção da nossa vida, promoção das nossas de trabalho, promoção de dignidade para toda a população, independente, né, de raça, de gênero, de cor, e isso só será possível dentro de uma sociedade socialista. É isso.
So like Yara mentioned, we're celebrating a day that started in Latin America. So it was so great to hear from Katia, being down in Brazil. And unfortunately, she couldn't make it with us, but I'm glad that she was able to send us in a video. So I'm going to focus now my next question a little bit more specifically on the question of abortion. We have with us Tifane, who's from Poland, and we've talked to Tifane before, so I'm so glad you're with us again. But about the question of abortion, Polish women and the Polish working class in general have really led the way in some respects on how to fight abortion. And, I'm in the US, and the question of a right to abortion is being attacked right now. We had an episode on it a few weeks ago, so if you missed it, make sure you check it out. We had Grace on the show, who organized a protest in Texas against this very oppressive abortion ban, which says basically that after 6 weeks, a woman can't get an abortion, and many of us know, sometimes you don't even know at 6 weeks that you're pregnant. But really, this court case is very interesting and could be groundbreaking because it doesn't say that women cannot get an abortion. What it says is that private citizens, anyone, can sue whoever participated in the woman getting the abortion. Not the woman herself, but the abortion clinic, the Uber driver, the mom who lent her the money, right? All of these people are at risk of being sued. So it's an interesting way that, interesting is the wrong word, it's a manipulative way that they're trying to get around the fact that we did win the right to abortion in the 70s. I mean, it just really shows, though, that even if we do win the right to something in 1970, whatever, they still can take it away, and we still need to have fundamental change. But unfortunately, right now in the US, we're not seeing this huge movement around protecting the access that women have to abortion. We are seeing small cases, people are talking about it, but it's not really generating movement. So Tiffany, I want you to talk a little bit more about what has happened in Poland over the past period, because I remember seeing these inspirational protests of, thousands of people in the streets defending the rights of women to have reproductive access.
Well, just 1 year ago, we started to have, as Toya described, a very inspirational movement here in Poland with a mood of that went from the demand of abortion rights to the demand of overthrowing the government. Actually, this is how far people were angry at this government that is building a hell for women, as we say here. But the government managed to implement a ban on abortion in case of fetal defect in last February. And 2 months ago, unfortunately, a woman died as a result of this law because she was 20 weeks pregnant. There was a fetal defect, and the clinic wouldn't provide her for an abortion that she needed to save her life because the fetus was not technically dead. And she died after that as a result of a sepsis. And when this information was raised in the press, there started to be a huge wave of anger again in Poland, with thousands demonstrating in the streets of the bigger cities. The main slogan being "Not one more." People call this the first death of the abortion ban, even if it's actually not the first death due to the restricted law on abortion in Poland, and it's certainly not the first time a woman's life is destroyed. But this time, the focus is more on a quiet resistance and on proposing women to have solutions to have an underground abortion, and the level of struggle has not yet reached the levels that we have seen last year. In the same time, the government has attacked the working class on different fronts. The hospitals workers are fighting for their conditions, so are the teachers and many other sectors. So last year, when the people were actually talking about a strike of women for abortion rights, we were arguing that what we needed was a general strike that would be organized in the workplaces within the working class and so on. And here again, there is a question that all those fronts that this reactionary government has opened should come in solidarity together to fight for their jobs, for better public services, and of course for the right of a woman to decide for her own body. I wanted to add that what the government is doing to women is not only very dangerous and violent. It is also very insulting, because when the information that this young woman Isa had died due to the laws they had passed, they declared things like, yes, women die in childbirth sometimes, just showing how little they care about the lives of women. One of the solutions for women who have to give birth to a non-viable child rather than getting an abortion was to propose crying rooms in the hospitals, so that a woman in this situation can get some privacy to cry about it. So all this this all these insults towards women actually have really angered the population, and now we have maybe you have heard of it, a crisis at the border with Belarus, where the government is actually playing human lives in their politics, and this is also actually angering people, and there has been some solidarity by the Polish people at the border together with the migrants. So I just want to conclude that the only way we can actually fight this very violent state, the violence they have against women and against migrants, against the working class, and all the oppressed in the population, is to come together and build solidarity of the working class against this government, but also the capitalist class that they represent.
Thank you, Tefeng. It's actually always really interesting to hear about what's happening, specifically in Poland, but generally around the world with abortion rights. I feel like it's one of these issues that keep being attacked, and it's, I think, getting clearer to women that mass movements are the only way to continue getting these rights. So thank you so much for talking about it. But I also want to talk about another huge kind of movement that's developed across the world in the past 10 years or so, which is obviously the movement against gender-based violence. And, you know, recently in the last year, we have seen in the UK the mass movement that developed after the horrendous Sarah Everard murder. She was murdered after basically a police officer pretended to arrest her. And it was horrendous and got loads of people out in the streets, and here in Ireland as well. But also, you know, we've seen these movements in Latin America, like we talked about, seen these movements all across the world, really. And recently in October, there were several protests in Belgium after there were complaints that came out about women having been raped after the drinks were spiked. And actually, it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to hear about this, because there's actually a lot of stuff like that in the news in the UK as well right now. And it's interesting to see if something similar to those mass protests in Belgium develops here as well. So we've got Adil here, who is from Liège in Belgium, who's a student, and she's also an activist with Rosa and the ISA in Belgium. So can you tell us a little bit more about, first of all, what has happened in Belgium and the protests and the movement and what's needed?
Yes, of course. In Ghent, a demonstration of 600 people took place in reaction of 2 cases of drugging and rape, as you said. In Brussels, the police waited for 17 complaints of sexual assault related to 2 bars, and the pressure of a mass movement to finally react. These kinds of complaints are not taken seriously by the police. It shows that you can have as many laws as you like. If the justice doesn't deal with the complaints, nothing happens. The demonstrations were attended by hundreds of people, and it shows something interesting, that shame has changed side. 10 years ago, victims of sexism would not have dared to speak out because they would have been faced with victim blaming. Now, young women just don't accept that anymore, and they feel strengthened and inspired by the international movement against gender-based violence. 27% of Europeans believe that gender-based violence is acceptable in certain circumstances. This is sickening. It sends a signal to the perpetrator that he is not guilty. It is the woman who is creating the sexism. It is the victim who provoked him by wearing a skirt, dancing with him, or asking him to walk her home, because she was afraid of going home alone. And rather than asking, why wasn't there a bus to take you home? Or why are women walking alone, harassed as if they were sexual objects? What do we receive? We receive a sentence like, what were you doing there alone at that time? Why were you so drunk? Why were you wearing that outfit? And that's sickening. And when people are repeatedly harassed when they go out and then blamed for it, it is normal that they try to not end up in such situation. This sexist and violent society pushes more and more people to look for safe space. Like the Blonde Café in Ghent, which received a lot of media attention after demanding the departure of cisgender men customers during a party. And feminism as a movement of struggle, we must organize to achieve an ambitious goal. A safe space, but not limited in space, time, or certain groups, but that extends to the whole of society. And we must continue to mobilize and build a feminist movement to show that we do not accept the violence. We must demand real action and the means to make it effective, such as proper training about gender-based violence for local police, educators, medical staff, decent and publicly financed victim support, but also investment in education so that topics such as sexism and mutual consent can be addressed in school. We also ask affordable housing so that women and gender non-conforming people can live on their own and escape their abusive partners or families. And we obviously need to fight for good jobs with good working conditions, which in Belgium includes a minimum wage of 14 euros per hour. We desperately need more public investment, but more than that, we need a society where the material basis for inequality and discrimination no longer exists. As long as the capitalist system exists and the logic of profit reigns, women will occupy a secondary position in society, and their bodies will be considered as commodities, and violence will occur, and violence will last, and rigid and unhealthy gender norms will prevail. And that is why, on 25th of November, in the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we will go to the streets all around the world with the Feminist, Socialist, Rosa campaign and defend another society, a socialist society.
Thank you so much for this, Adele. I think these were like really interesting things that you were saying, and I've been thinking about them a lot recently because I did my master's a few years ago, like 7 years ago, not that long ago actually. And what I did in my dissertation was actually I was interviewing women and asking them, like giving them all sorts of situations, and they were telling me if they thought it was sexual assault, if they thought it was rape, if they thought it was okay. And I was actually shocked by how many women were seeing kind of rape as these kind of myths that you just talked about how like it has to be violent, or it has to be kind of like a perfect victim, like a virgin who's not walking alone at night, who's dressed all like respectfully, whatever that means. But I actually really agree with you that now the perception has changed. I think if I did the exact same research today, which again, it wasn't that long ago when I did it the first time, I think the answers that I would get are completely different. And I think it's all to do with the movements that we've seen in the last few years, the Me Too movement, and in particular, but generally the movements again in Latin America as well, and all around the world that we were talking about. So it was really, really interesting for me to hear that.
I totally agree. I lived the Me Too movement in the beginning of my teenage years. So I lived in the duality of what my parents told me, what my school told me, what the entire culture told me about rape culture, and about what was exploding, the movement that was exploding, and the liberation of women and non-gender conforming people who were talking. And I think that I never believed in the fact that when you live a rape, it's not a rape, because my first encounter with sexual ideas was feminist sexual ideas, because I grew up as a teenager in this massive explosion of liberation of talk. So we can see that in the fact that there are more and more protests, because our generation we've been always in this protesting against sexism and against gender-based violence.
Odile, that's so inspiring to hear. Like, it's always interesting to me, you know, what radicalizes people and when they grew up. And like growing up during the, you know, Me Too and feminist movement, you know, that happened 5, 6, 7 years ago. It must have been, you know, a freeing time to grow up, if you will. But you ended... Yeah, it's so awesome. But you ended with talking about gender-based violence. And again, this is a term that's a little new to me and maybe to a lot of our viewers and listeners. So Laura, can you talk a little bit about what gender-based violence means and why it happens?
Big question, Toya, but I'll try and answer it. I'll just say that gender-based violence is a broad umbrella term that it will bring in all types of macho violence, all types of violence, harassment, abuse that affects women, in be it domestic violence, interpersonal violence, that affects the trans community, that sometimes affects children and families and so on with abusive parents. You know, where it comes from, we also draw a link. The movements in Latin America, the mass movements in Latin America that Yara opened with today, that Katia gave us an insight into, one of the things that the movement has always done is linked intimate partner violence and gender violence to the state violence that occurs. It's a huge factor of the movement in Chile. Their slogan is "The rapist is you," and it's aimed at the whole state and judicial system that, you know, obviously held up a dictatorship with extreme violence for so long, but also, you know, victim blames and is a space and a place in which victims and survivors can never get any justice. In terms of where it comes from, I think, like, one of the things, if you look at Yara, I just said Yara, sorry Yara, sorry Toya. If you look, Toya, at you know, what happened in the COVID pandemic, because actually what you've seen is the intensification of so many existing inequalities in the system. And specifically in terms of women, one of the huge things is an explosion of gender violence, an intensification of oppression and exploitation. You know, it's been women workers on the front line fighting the virus, you know, for the most part in healthcare and so on. And similarly, you know, lockdowns have been a time of the explosion of gender violence everywhere. And that is part and parcel of one of the ways in which capitalism has gender violence rooted into it, which is the promotion of you know, the if you like, patriarchal family, or the traditional family, and the ideas behind that put, you know, women's place as unpaid carers, that you know, utilizes women as a source of you know, a way to reproduce the labour force for capitalism, including through the care work that they do without getting paid so much ways in the world. And that sort of creates an inequality, and that inequality is backed up then by so many ways in which sexist and misogynistic ideas are propagated and reproduced.
100%, Laura. And I think I've actually just been reading Emily Ratajkowski's new book called My Body. And it's really brilliant. It talks exactly about what you're saying, that like the system is based on using women as objects. If anyone watching doesn't know, Emily Ratajkowski is like a really famous model who's done a lot of like nude shoots as well. And she really describes this kind of alienation from our bodies that women experience, and how from like the age of 0 all we hear about is how we need to be sexual and how we need to be beautiful. But then there's also this double standard that if you're beautiful and sexual, then you know, they're allowed to rape you, they're allowed to murder you, they're allowed to do whatever they want. And like the things that she's talking about are also really interesting in the context of what we're talking about class, and about how money plays such a big role in that. And, you know, I think it's, like you said, the COVID pandemic really showed how, you know, poor women on the front lines, working women, were the most likely to be harmed by this pandemic, but also the domestic violence rates were going up. And then at the same time, when we were fighting against it, like with the Sarah Everard case that I was talking about earlier, then the state was attacking our protests and attacking the women who were fighting back against it.
Absolutely, and concretely, Rosa activists in Ireland were fined for organising a socially distanced standout to call for action for emergency action to halt gender violence. At the height of the pandemic or whatever, they're fined for doing that. And a few weeks later, it emerged that this state scandal that thousands and thousands of 999 emergency calls pertaining to domestic violence disclosures are being cancelled by the cops here. We call them the Gardaí, by the police here in Ireland. So, absolutely what you say is very important. And I'd say other things. It's like you talked about Emily, the supermodel who has this new book out that I haven't read, but I've read about it. Another really important thing maybe to allude to, connected to what you're saying, is one of the factors at this point in time, if you look at what the extreme right are doing in America, for example, but also in Britain, big news outlets like the state news outlet like BBC has been part and parcel of attacking the trans community, attacking trans women. And that sort of transphobia, that is a continuation of the same sort of thing that oppresses all women and working class poor and women of colour and trans women the most, and non-binary people the most, which is that, these extremely rigid roles that, were never true, never will be true, and so on, are enforced about what women should be, what men should be, and so on. And part of that absolutely is pushing a culture of machismo and therefore the culture of gender violence. Like one of the things that Odil's little testimony there of what it's like to grow up as a young person being inspired by Me Too and the positives of that just gives you a tiny glimpse of what a movement can achieve. Because one of the things that we say is, like, where do these abusers come from? Like, no little, child is born as a horrible abuser. The system and society creates that. And the sort of, damaging, deeply damaging macho ideas and, male superiority or male, similar to in terms of racism, superiority ideas are absolutely rotten ideas that persist in every way in the state and the system and society, and that's where that comes from. And movements and struggle based on ideas of solidarity that also stand for free public housing, for taking on the big polluters of capitalism, for jobs and homes for everybody, all the things that we all so clearly need, are movements that can stand and that absolutely fight every aspect of sexism, misogyny, racism, transphobia. They are the movements that can change also attitudes,
Laura, let me interrupt you real quick, because you're talking about movements that fight against misogyny, feminist movements, and Odile mentioned Me Too. And I we have this new example of activists, Me Too activists, fighting back and getting, I don't know what happened with the tennis player in China. Was she kidnapped? She's gone missing. Me Too started with celebrities speaking out, and we realize the importance of them doing that. But in a place like China, with the type of government that they have, can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely, Toya. And I'll just say, like you spoke earlier, Toya, about how on one side of the new Cold War has a state 8 times the size of Ireland that's just banned abortion. And then the other side of the Cold War, the regime is absolutely the whole dictatorship's ideology is ultranationalism, and then drumming up this really, really patriarchal, anti-feminist, anti-LGBT kind of hysteria. That's a very, very important part of the CCP's dictatorship's approach. But also concretely, I'll just say they're trying to they're going to now limit this from the same sickos that brought you the one-child policy. They're now going to try and restrict abortion. because they actually they have not enough workers to make profits for the Chinese capitalists, and they want to just physically force women, people who can get pregnant, to have children. But anyway, this is the nature of the regime. So yes, Peng Shuai, very a top class international athlete and tennis star, made a Me Too disclosure on her social media about a top official in the regime, and very quickly her account was shut down. And basically, where is Peng Shuai is trending on social media in China. She seems to have been disappeared by the regime. Some sort of eerie statement came out today purporting to be her, saying she's fine and that she was hacked, etc. But it doesn't sound in any way credible. And this is what you're dealing with in terms of the reality facing the young feminists in China at this point in time, that I will say show the potential to build a working class socialist feminism. They're exactly the same young people standing and trying to organise online to say we need to build independent trade unions. And I'll just say, so you have that on the one side. Like in the US, the other side of the new Cold War, Britney Spears has just been freed from her conservatorship after 13 years. One of the, someone who I'm old enough to be the same age as, etc. And, was this massive superstar, one of the most famous women in the world, a white woman. And she literally, despite all that privilege, was totally incarcerated and tied to her abusers by the state, to her abusers in her family.
They even were trying to control her reproductive.
I know, absolutely.
They wouldn't allow her to remove her birth.
I know. Absolutely. Another example, gender violence. It's always, what is it about? It's about trying to control us as people, trying to knock our self-esteem, to control and repress us as people in every single way. So the whole ideology of controlling women's bodies is the ideology of gender violence. There's no, a state that doesn't let people control their own bodies and doesn't let women and people get pregnant control their own bodies is a state in which the ideas of gender violence are being promoted from the very, 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 very top.
So what do we do, Laura? I mean, I think we talked about it, and I think we all agree that, sexism and violence and gender-based violence and our rights to our bodies and every single element of our lives as women and gender non-conforming people are controlled by a state or controlled by a system that is not going to stop out of the blue to oppress us. So what is the strategy that we need to get rid of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it, Yara? So, well, the first thing I'd say is, in the ISA, we have been part of launching Rosa's Socialist Feminist International Network and being part of trying to actively build an international socialist feminist movement. We need to, the sort of, Yara mentioned the fact that there hasn't been a huge struggle yet against the Texas abortion ban. Yet part of the reason for that is the people who sit at the top of supposed feminism, the establishment of feminism is tied in completely with the status quo, tied in completely with the Democratic Party, and they have a vested interest in not building the type of struggle necessary, because that struggle is going to be a threat to the politicians that they support and are connected with. So establishment feminism can offer us nothing that stays within the confines of a system that oppresses and exploits the majority of the world's population so brutally, that has, is bringing hunger at this point in time to so many of the world's women and poor working class and women of colour. And people in general. And so we need to consciously build a feminism of struggle, and a feminism of solidarity. Who are our allies? Our allies are the exploited and the oppressed, the millions who've struck and occupied in the Ni Una Menos movement in Latin America in recent years, the Netflix workers who walked out in support of their trans siblings against the company's peddling of transphobia for profit, the 3,500 workers who went on strike against gender violence at the Mercedes plant in the Basque Country last month because of the femicide of their beloved colleague. Her name was Erica Tavares. and the 5,000 indigenous women who marched against Bolsonaro in Brazil last month, who are on the front line at this point in time of the fight for climate justice, the fight for their own lives, the fight for the future of the planet in terms of the conscious destruction of the Amazon by the extreme right of capitalism. And this fight is a fight for the lives of for the future of the planet, for the lives and rights of the majority of the population. Specifically on gender violence, obviously we need to build everywhere there's sexism, everywhere there's misogyny, everywhere there's racism and transphobia, we have to fight it. Any sort of gain that we can make, let's do it. In Ireland, at this point in time, we're campaigning for an immediate. This is an emergency, gender violence, domestic violence emergency. We need an immediate trebling of all funding for resources. But we actually say there has to be a public inquiry, to ascertain and root out every element of anti-working class prejudice, sexism and misogyny, anti-traveller racism in general, that exists in the police, in the state system, in the court system, and so on, and to actually begin and that inquiry has to be led by feminists in struggle, anti-racist campaigners themselves, the trade union activists, and actually begin a massive discussion in society about how we can exert democratic control over these institutions that don't, so clearly go against our interests. We need to build a movement for public housing. In Berlin at this point in time, in the recent weeks and months, nurses have been on strike in Charité Hospital, a really important struggle, but also this huge victory has been won, and now it has to be pushed further in terms of taking on the vulture funds and so on that control housing. We need a program to essentially take on the power of the capitalist establishment in every regard, and to disempower them, to put democratic working class public ownership of the key resources, key levers of the economy into public hands, and to begin to make a plan of the economy according to people's needs. And that kind of, if you like, revolutionary movement, that cannot possibly be built without us shaking up and changing every single, reactionary, backward idea that is out there and exists. And Odil's tiny little example in terms of her own situation as a young person and the effects of Me Too and the beginning of a feminist movement developing in Belgium shows how much what a struggle and a movement like this could achieve. But it's vital. The polarization, the rise of the extreme right, we have to build this sort of socialist left, and socialist feminism is the way of struggle in terms of all of these issues.
I totally agree, Laura. You inspire me every time I hear you. I know that you're located in Ireland. We also have Rosa in Ireland that, led the way for many socialist feminist activists, but we have Rosa all over the world. So if you want to get involved in a socialist feminist fight, you can check out our website, which is in the description below. I want to thank all of our guests here today. This was such an excellent episode, especially thanks to you, Lauren T. Fain, for returning. And Odile, we hope to see you again real soon.
Wow, what an amazing episode. I always love doing the socialist feminist episodes. I feel like they always teach me so much, and because it's such an international movement and we are an international organization, it's always amazing to hear from our members on the ground, but also, like Toya said at the start, to learn where this is coming from and how we can fight against it. So I want to thank everyone, but also we have obviously the shout out of the week this week, and I think you can guess from the start of this episode that the shout out of the week today is our members that went to COP26. I want to thank everyone for coming. Obviously, it was an amazing event. We talked about it a lot, and I cannot shut up about it. I think every single person that went to COP with us left so inspired. What's even burnout? All really looking forward to continue to fight. both against climate change, but generally for a better future, like Laura said, against oppression as well, and for a socialist world. So we're going to put in a little clip from COP26 so you can see our bloc in action, and trust me, there was a lot of action. You hear me now with my voice, but I did not have it for about 3 whole days, so it was amazing. So take a look at the video, and then we'll see you next week.
This is World to Win. Every Sunday, we broadcast with speakers from across the globe, bringing you the latest news and analysis on the fast-moving global events from a socialist perspective. Subscribe to the International Socialist Alternatives YouTube page and click the bell to get notified when we go live for a new episode. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram because there's a lot to do and we have a world to win.
When we fight! When we fight! When we fight! Solidarity!